I've been in the room when at the Yale actually the Yale Peabody Museum, Christoph Ziskowski, who's part of the Yale Bird Friendly Building Initiative, he and Vivica actually set out all, I think it was like almost 800 or almost 900 carcasses they had collected during the 2022 to 23 year. They laid them out so that all the birds could be seen at one time. And that's sort of like an homage both to the birds, but also to the work of FLAP Canada, which is Fatal Light Awareness Program in Canada. They do that every year with all the bird carcasses that they've collected as they create like mandalas or images of with all the bird carcasses, all the bird bodies. And it's both beautiful and so heartbreaking. And I was in the room when I went into Peabody, where they had set it up, and it was almost too much to bear to see like beautiful, like American woodcocks, northern parulas. There were a few hawks. There was a red-tailed hawk, a juvenile. They're just beautiful birds that I would love to see alive. And the sad thing about the collisions is that these birds are in the prime of their life. They're otherwise healthy. They just happen to mistake for one, instant, a reflection on a glass or a transparent glass for habitat or something else, or flora, fauna, and they entered their lives. So they're perfect specimens, and they look so peaceful. And yet that the weight of that being in the room was very upsetting. And I was trying to reconcile that, and Christoph kind of helped me through that time. He actually like ministered to me, I would say, because he's actually a scientist. He's an ornithologist, but because he's the head of the the Peabody vertebrate collection, and he said these birds are getting a second life because they passed, but their passing is going to help tell the story and help to push for mitigation of buildings at Yale. So these birds, they're having a second life, and the photographs of those birds have been shown all over because I've used that photograph of the bird assembled in that way. I've used it in some different settings. Vivica uses it in her presentations, like whenever she gives talks, she shows the image of those birds. And I know that it's helping to convince the Yale administrators to mitigate more buildings. So I will say, in a weirdly spiritual way, that's like spiritual language of these birds get a second life. They died, but their legacy lives on, and the truth they can tell the world is continuing on. So like you can have an effect after death, I think has a spiritual resonance to it, and help me to reconcile, the as sad as it is with the collisions, is that those birds have a particular, as it wasn't consensual. That's the problem. It was like they weren't agreeing to it or anything, but they're being able to hopefully change the world collectively. Because when you saw what happened in at McCormick Place last October, when 1,300 birds all crashed into one building in one morning, and the images of all those dead birds, it did change the world. And it did materially change the world, because then the McCormick Place property owners finally decided that they needed to mitigate that building, and they applied feather-friendly films on it so that now the risk of bird collisions should be much lower, and they committed to turning off the lights at night. So those birds horrifically died in a super tragic, that's the largest mass mortality bird event that's ever recorded in the United States. But those birds at the same time have made it so that future migrants won't crash into that building, and raised awareness, because that was on the cover of the New York Times, as CBS. And it's really sad to think of it that way, because I don't want to think of them as like sacrificial lambs or something, like sacrifice themselves for it. But the thing is that because the collision monitoring is happening, and they're contributing to science, is that they are part of a story that people are hopefully waking up to. So the mortality aspect of it is so tragic that it takes, I'll just say that it takes mass mortality events, and it takes mortality of the level of 2 to 5 billion to motivate people to consider birds as part of the built environment. Otherwise, sadly, if they weren't dying or whatever, we probably wouldn't even think about migratory birds moving through spaces or going through urban areas and things. So sadly, the mortality is like shows us their presence there and shows us that the way that we're building is not in harmony with them. So it's really important indicators, sadly. It's kind of like how you could look at maybe from a scientific perspective is that mortality is showing us that the way that we're building and the kind of urban planning that we're doing is not uh facilitating the life in making space for the life of migratory birds and like other living things.